I'm going to build this video from an absolute beginner's perspective to a pro. This video is going to be super technical. Now, watching a lot of reviews might make you think every editor is running a computer like this. Super blazing computers are really necessary, but what if you are an absolute beginner or your budget is super low, and for that matter, you are running an editing suite on something like this? It becomes hard for you to relate with most of the good things the reviewer talks about because your machine just can't do any of what they say. You might be an absolute beginner, a professional editor, but a computer hardware illiterate, or someone who doesn't care about all that stuff. For you, it's all about the money. If the computer is expensive, it has to deliver. You see, the world of media production isn't as simple as putting Word documents together. The technicalities are nothing like what you learn in school. It's nothing like Kofi has 3 balls, a monkey still 1. How many balls are left in Kofi's sack? Like, who cares about Kofi or his balls, right? In this video, I'll be talking about both hardware and software optimization for speed workflow in Premiere and Davinci, budget and machine specs, causes and solutions to crash problems in both Davinci and Premiere Pro. Now, without wasting any further Before we get into the breakdown, let me get this question out of the way real quick. Why would anyone switch from Premiere to Davinci? Is Davinci any good than Premiere? The answer is a simple yes. Davinci is gradually gaining an upper hand over Premiere in terms of everything except when it comes to certain fancy templates and plugins. Many reasons causing people to switch from Premiere to Davinci would be: 1. Davinci is completely free for absolute beginners and even some pros. 2. Davinci has a lot of blockbuster features to offer, including stability and a completely GPU accelerated system. Working here is fast and fun. 3. The Davinci software offers the best color grading system and also a 3D compositor, which are all inbuilt into the software. This makes working super easy, thereby saving you tons of time. There are only 2 problems with Davinci, which I'm certain wouldn't be an issue in 2 to 3 years to come. 1 would be you can't just run the software on any machine. Your machine specs determine the density of your sequence. What it means is get a better machine if you want to edit and grade higher resolution footages with multiple color and compositing nodes. 2. The Davinci user base isn't that big, so it might be a bit of an issue to make a complete switch from Premiere to Davinci. Maybe you might consider working with XMLs, but it would be really awesome if you can learn Davinci in addition to Premiere or whatever software that you are on. Look, we live in a world where Blender and Davinci is completely free. You have no excuse to make at this point if you have dreams of becoming a 3D artist or a video editor. I disagree with people who say just master your craft. Softwares aren't important. You hear this on the production field a lot. You see, the thing is, 1. 90% of mastering your craft will demand a software. 2. If you think softwares aren't that important, just try editing a blockbuster movie in Filmora or Camtasia. And 3. Mastering your craft is as important as mastering a particular software. And that is why we talk about softwares all the time, so people can have a fair idea on what software they opt in for. Now let's get technical. If you are running a powerful computer that seems to never stop crashing anything you throw at it, I would plead with you to kindly open it up. If it's a desktop, take out the RAM, GPU, and hard drive, clean it a bit and refix them. The reason for this is that a lot of desktops we buy from online sometimes don't get smooth transport. If that happens, maybe a GPU might shift just a little, or maybe a cable might get loose of the hard drive. And if that happens, your newly built transported desktop will be a horror to deal with when it arrives. It is always advisable to call for support or refix the component if you are technically inclined. If you are running Davinci or Premiere on a low-spec machine, kindly take notes on this one. Premiere Pro and Davinci functions on machines with as low as 4 GB RAM with a 2 to 4 GB integrated GPU. I'll talk about hard drives and maybe CPUs later, but let's be honest. With this kind of spec, I bet a tortoise would finish its dinner before a single software is able to open on your machine. It's the slowest performance you are going to get running Premiere or Davinci. These particular low spec ranges would be able to handle 1080p and below footages with 20 to 30 frames per second. 60 to 120 would require system upgrades, or you would have to rely on proxies. I have left a link to another channel in my description that talks about what proxies are and the best possible way to create them. Maybe you might think of upgrading your RAM, but it's always advisable to check your CPU spec to see if the upgrade will be worth it. If you are running an old CPU, then I would advise you save yourself some cash and get yourself a new machine with a better CPU. One good thing about Premiere Pro is that Premiere Pro functions better on low spec machines than Davinci. The reason being that Premiere Pro balances between CPU and GPU. Davinci, on the other hand, is currently completely GPU accelerated, but if you have the money and are currently thinking of getting a machine purposely for 3D animation or video editing, then kindly take notice of these CPUs I'm about to mention. Now, the best CPU for Premiere Pro depends heavily on what you will be doing and your budget. For workloads that are primarily using H264 and H265, Intel's Core i9-12900K does a great job. When working with red footages, on the other hand, AMD's Threadripper Pro 5975WX and 5995WX tops the chart. Kindly don't forget to subscribe for an absolute updated version of this video as new PC components keeps getting released. At the moment, AMD CPUs are stronger in terms of live playback and exporting performance in Premiere Pro and Davinci. However, if you are building a machine that will be running both editing and animation apps like Blender, Maya, Cinema 4D, etc., then kindly stick to an Intel CPU, especially from the i9 to the i12. The reason being that the Intel 12th generation CPUs perform close to similarly priced AMD Ryzen CPUs, but include Quick Sync, which can be used to process H264 and HEVC media rather than relying on the GPU to do those tasks. This frees more space for the GPU to be used for processing GPU accelerated effects, Debayer R3D footages, etc. Now back to those with low-end machines. If your CPU is poor, your RAM upgrade will be of little effect in terms of work speed, stability, rendering, and exporting. It will be better to get a new machine instead. If your machine specs are low, kindly take into consideration the resolution of your footage, its frame rate, and color bit. Before we talk about optimizing your computer for speed workflow, let's talk about GPU. Premiere Pro and Davinci benefit greatly from using a GPU, but which card is best depends on how many GPU accelerated effects or color nodes when in Davinci versus the layer system in Premiere you use, and whether you regularly export H264 or H265. For regular editors or PC users, there isn't much of a difference between various NVIDIA GPUs because there isn't too much to do as a regular PC user. In addition to the raw power of your GPU, it is essential that your video card has enough VRAM for your project. VRAMs are chosen based on the complexity, density, and length of your sequence. If you are someone who edits documentaries or series, you should know that a 4GB VRAM will surely be a problem if your high-resolution timeline begins to accommodate a lot of effects and color layers. Meanwhile, someone who edits shorter content, such as art, won't have a single issue when running the same specs. For Premiere Pro and Resolve, it's advisable to go in for NVIDIA GeForce/Quadro cards for higher performance than to go in for a comparably priced AMD Radeon Pro card. This is due to the fact that NVIDIA majors on productivity, therefore releasing constant stable driver updates for its users, whilst AMD majors on gaming. You might not have any issue running Resolve or Premiere on an AMD graphics card, but one thing I can assure you is to get ready for constant crashing and slower rendering. Now again, if you are someone running a weaker machine, then I guess everything I spoke on GPU will come in handy when you are ready to purchase a stronger machine. Computer optimization isn't meant for only weaker machines. Stronger machines even need them the most. I've seen well-built machines cripple down in speed because they haven't been optimized for months, sometimes a year or two. One thing to note is that most machines do well at optimizing themselves, but for most Windows users, you would have to optimize manually because Windows doesn't do a great job at auto-optimizing. I'm going to be doing this in two parts: the overall computer optimization and then Resolve and Premiere Pro optimization. There are so many things to look out for when it comes to the overall optimization. One will be disabling high memory consuming startup apps. Personally, this is what I do the moment I get a new computer. After I'm done installing all my softwares or games on this new computer, I head over to the task manager, select startup. From here, I disable any startup apps that consumes too much memory. These apps consumes too much memory even if the computer is not in use. Disabling all those apps helps your computer's startup time much less. Again, pay attention to bloatwares. If they have no use, get rid of them. 2. Change your PC power settings. This happens mostly on laptops. Now, what this does is your laptop by default would always be set to better performance. Now, when this happens, it means your PC would be reserving performance in exchange for battery life. If you are running a laptop with a discrete GPU or an integrated GPU, kindly hit on the battery icon and push the slider to best performance. Note, it is mostly advisable to have your laptop on charge if you are going to be using this best performance option, because it takes up a lot of energy to produce the speed. But if you have a stronger battery, you are good to push the slider up. Number 3 will be virus. Okay, so real quick, let me share this with you. You see, there is this level of speed or fan noise you hear when you execute certain tasks on your computer. A good example will be rendering or exporting. Until these tasks are done, your computer never gets quiet. But I figured my computer had been very noisy and super slow even when I wasn't running anything. I couldn't render anymore. I tried every optimization and PC fix I came across on the internet and still found no solution. Until 3 days later, something told me to check my task manager, and there it was. My CPU had hit in between constant 98 and 100, while the RAM had also clocked 20 gigabytes. Dude, like that was some Bitcoin mining level crap going on my computer without my knowledge. After running a few different antiviruses, I was able to get rid of it. Now, as a PC user, you should always be able to tell if there's anything wrong with your computer. If it's constantly overheating, if it's idle, or you are someone who experienced too many app crashes, don't ignore the signs. Find a solution to the problem real quick, else your productivity will slow down. And as we all know, slow productivity equals bad business. Okay, so my number 4 would be clearing temporal files. One thing you should know is the more you keep running heavy tasks continuously on your computer, the more cache files and offline web pages pile up, thereby amassing a huge part of your hard drive space for nothing. These are unwanted files, so we have to get rid of them. There are so many ways of clearing temporal files on PC, but this is how I do mine all the time. I right-click on the Windows icon, select Run. A search box shows up. Type in the box %temp% and hit enter. Delete every file you see in there. From here, go into the recycle bin and empty them. Yeah, so these 4 steps are the most common solutions I go for anytime I feel a drop in speed whilst working. Now let's move on to optimizing our editing software. Let's begin with Premiere and then we will do Davinci. Okay, so number 1 will be GPU previewing. Now, Premiere Pro can real-time preview in 3 different ways. One is CPU, which is the software only, right? This means you want to hand over all the workload to the software. You don't need the help of your GPU. That's what it means. But as you click on the drop down, if you get to realize that is the only option you are getting, then it simply means you have no GPU in your machine. Number 2 is going to be OpenCL. Now, OpenCL shows up for people running AMD graphics and other integrated GPUs. And then we have the third one to be CUDA. Select this option if you are running an NVIDIA GPU. One other thing to note is that before you start with a new project, you are greeted with a box here. The first option, which is software only, is always selected by default. So it is always up to you to go in there and select which one matches your GPU type. In case you forgot to select it here before starting your project, never mind. You can still access it from here. Go to File, select Project Setting, hit on General, then use the Renderer drop-down menu to select your preference. Now your machine is going to offload some of the tasks from the CPU onto the GPU if you had OpenCL or CUDA selected. Number 2 would be directing your media cache to a different drive. By default, your media cache are stored on your OS drive. This works okay, but it is not optimal for performance because the OS drive should only mostly be focused on delivering its best read and write performance to your OS and your applications. It's better to move your resources to a different drive if possible. If your drive isn't partitioned or you don't have a second hard drive, just ignore it. But if you do, you can consider this option. It's nothing dangerous. If anything should happen, the software would go back to its default setting if you mistakenly take out a drive or whatever drive that you redirected your cache files on. So now this is how to get it done. Select, choose Preference, go to Media option. From there, you can see a media cache database. First of all, select the Clean option. Wait for it to finish and then select Browse. Create a folder and give it a name of your own choice and select that folder. Now you are done. Congratulations, you've redirected all your cache resources onto a different drive separate from where you installed your OS. Number 3 is going to be decreasing your preview resolution to enable a smooth playback. Now one thing you should notice, this option only reduces the quality of your video in the timeline in order for you to have a smooth playback. Your final render or exported video wouldn't be affected even if you hit on export whilst this feature is still on half or quarter. Number 4 is always make sure you grade or color correct on an adjustment layer. Using an adjustment layer gives you the option to be able to toggle on and off a layer, especially if you are done with the grading but still want to do some minor works like edit some effects and stuff. When you are finally done and ready to export, you can toggle back the adjustment layer. This procedure adds more speed to your workflow than grading in actual footage. Okay, so moving on, I would like to talk about one problem that I regularly see online, and I think most users are unable to find a solution to it, and it has to do with graphics driver update. One thing to note about graphics driver update is not all up-to-date graphics drivers are okay, especially when it comes from Intel or AMD. Now let me use one machine we got here as an example. It's an HP laptop with an integrated Intel GPU. Now what happened was the driver update this particular version had from Intel in February 2022 was really fast. But then we realized our works couldn't render or export anymore. It renders or exports to a point and then stops. Both Premiere, Davinci, Blender or any software we had on this machine that used GPU. Now this is one problem that took us a lot of time to find solution for, because we searched everywhere online and nobody seemed to find an answer to it. You could have your work render from 0 to 9, sometimes 0 to 16, and then it stops. It would be there for years, it would never move. But finally we were able to get a solution for this, and it was going back to an old driver. Now what you have to do is to search online for an old driver to your machine's driver, right? Download, uninstall the newly installed driver that is giving you problems and install the old driver, and your machine will be back to life. It took Intel 3 months to release another driver to fix that problem. You see, I don't know how many people have gone through a driver update issue like that, but if that happens, just download an old driver and your work should render fast after that. If none of what I have spoken seems to solve your problem, then your issue could maybe be a corrupt hard drive or a weaker hard drive. It's either your hard drive is corrupt or it's weak, it's old for that matter. And if this happens, most often you would get to realize your actual Windows is crashing. Anytime you run heavy tasks for a very longer time, you get to realize your Windows crashes. The possibility of your hard drive being corrupt or weak is high when your Windows constantly keeps crashing. Okay, now let's move on to Davinci Resolve Optimization. I wrote a lot on optimization for Davinci, but then I came across this channel that spoke about the optimization process in Davinci so well that I scrapped mine. His was good. So I've left a link in the description below to his channel. You can watch if you are a Davinci user facing lag or crash issues. Davinci comes in two versions, free and paid. Now this is what you'll be missing out if you go in for the free version. One good thing about Resolve is that Davinci can handle regular 1080p files at 24 to 30 frames per second if your GPU is quite outdated, or if you are running an integrated GPU with less than 4 GB VRAM. 8 GB RAM and above is ideal no matter how broke you consider yourself to be. If you want a quite decent speed in Resolve, don't fall below these crappy specs. Also check your CPU clock speed and core count before making certain upgrades to your desktop's component. If you realize your CPU is old, kindly get it replaced before any other upgrade, else you sure are going to be running a bottlenecked machine. But if you have the money and you really want to go in hard on your cards, grading and compositing, then you should be looking at some of the good machine builds ranging from 2070 Nvidia cards upwards. Like I said for Premiere Pro, AMD cards are great and sure might not cause any problem, but they render slow. Editing has nothing to do with gaming, so let's just leave AMD to the gamers. I only wanted to focus on dropping some technical tips, but if you are wondering which software between Premiere and Davinci is best, you know what? My favorite advice would be for you to first of all try the free version of Premiere and Resolve to see which one you are able to flow with comfortably without stress and major on it. 2. Consider the kind of working environment you find yourself in. If it's a Premiere Pro environment, go for Premiere. If it's a Davinci environment, go for Davinci. Look, it's way easier this way. You can learn anything you want from varieties of minds and also get problems solved quicker. Way better than you using something that nobody else is using. The disadvantages are many if you do that. 3. You can master both softwares actually if you want. Just give yourself 6 to 10 months of consistent use and you would find yourself flowing in both softwares with ease. Now with all these said and done, I think Davinci has more to offer to its users than Premiere Pro in times ahead. I personally think Premiere is stacked, but we all see the major improvements Davinci makes with each update and it's very promising. Davinci is a great option if Premiere isn't working for you. If you are an absolute beginner, kindly check your machine specs before considering Davinci. It's heavily GPU integrated. Okay, if you love this video, then a sub to my channel would be awesome. Until my next video, peace out.